Welcome in to Palmetto Sports Daily. It's Caroline here, joined by Rick, Teagan, and Kevin. Happy New Year to everybody out there, and I guess we could go ahead and call 2026 the year of the Carolina Panthers, because as of yesterday, the Panthers are in the playoffs, snapping an 8-year drought. It's their first appearance in the postseason since 2017, their first NFC South title since 2015. That was the year I started high school. Things are crazy. The Panthers, though, had the opportunity to control their own destiny in each of the last 2 weeks, in Week 17 and Week 18. They ended up dropping both of those games, so there were a lot of long faces in the locker room on Saturday after their loss to Tampa Bay, because it really wasn't up to them whether they won the NFC South and got in. It was all up to the Atlanta Falcons, and the Panthers have them to thank for getting into the playoffs, because the Falcons ended up beating the Saints in a very tight one in classic NFC South style, by the way, a game that went down to the wire, had an interception come in. D. Alford ended up saving the day and put the Falcons in position to kick a field goal to put the game out of reach. Of course, the Saints would come down and score a touchdown to make it a 2-point game. That onside kick, head coach Dave Canales said while he was watching it at home, that was the most nerve-wracking part of the day for him. The Falcons ended up recovering it, and they win it. So like I said, a lot of long faces in that Panthers locker room on Saturday, but really a full-on, flipping a 180 mindset about 24 hours later when they learn that they made it into the postseason. A lot of players, a lot of coaches watching it at home on their own time. Head coach Dave Canales here, you'll hear him reliving his account of watching the Falcons beat the Saints and get his own team into the postseason.
The neighborhood is crazy. We were yelling from our couch as a family and walked outside where we normally ride bikes and walk the dogs, and there was just neighbors out in front in the front yards. Everyone was really excited, but really, and also just proud of this team, proud of the coaches, the players, everybody involved.
So Carolina winds up with the 4 seed now. They'll end up taking on the 5 seed Rams in the wild card round this coming Saturday. That'll be 4:30 p.m. at Bank of America Stadium. The first time Bank of America has hosted a playoff game since 2015, like we mentioned, when Cam Newton was calling the shots out there. They already have beat the Rams this year, though, guys. If we think back to Week 13, it was that thriller of a game that ended up being a 31-28 win for Carolina. So is that a good thing? Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to beat the same team twice in one season. But, Rick, what are your thoughts about the Panthers making it and then getting a matchup with the 12-5 Rams coming to town on Saturday?
Well, first of all, Caroline, we can't call 2026 the year of the Carolina Panthers when they haven't won a game yet. And they do have
they're
a game
in.
on Saturday.
It's been 5 days and they're in.
Yeah, but still, they haven't won a game. Plus, all these videos of Carolina fans singing, dancing. They made the playoffs. Yes, they did. Congratulations. But here's what's really sticking in my craw. You come down to the last day of the regular season. The 2 teams atop the NFC South have losing records, and they have to wait until the 2 worst teams in the division play before they can decide who's the best of the worst. And those are the Carolina Panthers. So congratulations. They came out on top, and now they've got the Rams, and the Rams, I'm sure they're looking like, hey, they caught us the first time when we had to go to Bank of America Stadium. They're going to be on high alert this time, and I consider the Rams one of the top teams in the National Football League. I think it's going to be very tough for the Panthers to come out on top, but man, I can just see Don Shula, Tom Landry, legends of the game, Jim Brown, rolling over in their graves going, is this what the National Football League has come to, where losing teams, a whole losing division? How sorry is that? The whole division losing records. Oh, my goodness. Teagan?
Rick, I learned a new phrase, by the way. What did you say? The stick in, what was that? Tell me about that, because I've never heard that before.
Yeah, what really sticks in my craw?
Wow. Okay. Learned something new.
You young,
Anyway,
you
going
young
back
folks
to the
should go ahead and
Panthers,
Google that.
I will do that after the show. The Panthers, like you were saying, these are all losing teams in that division. Somebody had to win, I guess. If you had asked me if it was going to be the Panthers at the beginning of the season or the middle of the season or like 4 weeks ago, I probably would have said no. In fact, I definitely would have said no. So it is a good surprise for Panthers fans, but yeah, I mean, they've been so unpredictable throughout this entire season. We've talked about it game after game and some of those lucky wins that they got. I think the Rams was one of those games where they did get some more consistency in there, but I don't know if they're going to have that same consistency twice, a second time against the Rams. So I think this will be a really big challenge for them. I think it'll be really nice for Carolina fans that they'll have this at home, that they'll have that postseason appearance. Whether it'll be more than one postseason appearance, that's still TBD, Kevin.
Carolina is a 10.5-point underdog at home in the first round of the playoffs. I think there's a chance it's the first time ever a team has been a double-digit underdog at home in the first round of the playoffs. So that kind of tells you where the Panthers are at this season. But the fact that they're playing the Rams again, a team that they've already beaten this season, it infuriates me because it means that they have a chance. And I should just put my entire mortgage payment on the Rams going into this game. But because they already beat them this year, there's that little part of me that's saying, I can't do that because I need to pay the mortgage. The other thing is, I'm coming out and I'm saying this is probably the worst scenario for the Panthers for the future of the team beyond this season. Because now, what do they do with Bryce Young going forward? I think it's clear the way he played the last couple of weeks, Bryce Young is not the answer at quarterback going forward for this team. And now he's taking them to the playoffs. They almost have to give him that extension and sign him for that 5th year going into next offseason and going into getting ready for next season. I don't know if that's the smart move. I don't know how much you pay. There's a lot that goes on in here, and I think this might kind of drag them down for future seasons because they had this success. I think it might have been better for them if they had missed the playoffs, go forward and say, hey, we know Bryce isn't the guy, so let's just get ready to go forward after this 4th season and move on. But now, I don't know what they do after this, Caroline.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kevin. I mean, a lot of things to consider. Both can be true at once, right? If you're a Panthers fan, you can be pumped about getting this opportunity, being able to host a playoff game for the first time in a very long time. But you can also be concerned about what the future holds. Obviously, the longer you keep winning, the worse draft pick you get as well, right? So those are definitely both things that can be true at once. But it is worth noting that, I mean, Dave Canales has this team in a spot at this point in time that maybe a lot of people didn't expect him to have for another couple years. They are 8-9, but guys, we talk about these records. Now that they're in the playoffs, everybody's 0-0. Let's have some fun. We've got playoff football to talk about. It's going to be a fun one on Saturday at 4:30. We will be there, but we also have more Palmetto Sports Daily coming up for you right after this.
And welcome back to Palmetto Sports Daily, our first show of 2026, where, hey, we've got basically a full house. Hope all of you out there watching us had a great holiday break. And for a lot of the college football teams, not only here in state, but around the country, very busy. The Gamecocks, coming off that 4-8 year, got several new offensive coaches, including a new offensive coordinator, Kendall Browse, and a new offensive line coach, Randy Clements. And over the past several weeks, well, I won't say several weeks, the past few days, we've seen a lot of Gamecocks either declaring they are going to enter the transfer portal or actually jumping in, and the majority of them have been offensive linemen. And for the past couple of years for the Gamecocks, offensive line play has been very suspect, and we saw it this year. I believe the Gamecocks gave up like over 40 sacks, maybe around 44. And it looks like they realize, the coaches realize, that they have to shore up that offensive line, especially when you have two of your key weapons coming back on offense, in quarterback Lenore Sellers and receiver Nick Harbor. And your offense really is going to be only as good as your offensive line is as far as protecting the quarterback, opening running lanes for the running backs. So we'll see. what happens starting in spring practice, how this offense starts to develop. Kevin, your thoughts on the Gamecocks remaking of their offense, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the quality of the guys that they're losing, especially on the offensive line. It seems like more the quantity that makes me nervous, because Shane Beamer's going to have a lot of work to do in this transfer portal over the next couple of weeks just to bring in enough guys to have an offensive line room going forward. You know, don't even talk about starters, just about guys to back up those starters once you have them. I think it's like 7 of 9 guys have gone in the portal or are leaving the program going forward. So a lot of work, and you know, for Kendall Briles, the new offensive coordinator, he's got to find guys that fit his system. So maybe that was part of the reason a lot of these guys are leaving, is they think they don't fit that system. But a lot of work for these coaches to do going forward, Caroline.
Yeah, Kevin, absolutely. I mean, to your point, I think it could be an opportunity for both those guys to bring in guys, like you said, that work with them, right, and really get to make this thing their own. I think that's part of that. It's just the state of where college athletics is right now. Just a lot of outflow and a lot of inflow, and that just seems to be kind of the way things are going right now. Some new offensive coaches over at South Carolina, but also an official offensive coordinator hire at Clemson. The Tigers are bringing in Chad Morris, and he's not new. He's really an old, familiar face. He was the offensive coordinator for the Tigers back from 2011 to 2014 for head coach Dabo Swinney, bringing a ton of success to Clemson in that time, including their first ACC championship in over 20 years at the time, and a lot of success that followed him there. So much so, he ended up getting a couple head coaching gigs. He was at SMU for a little bit, then Arkansas. He was an offensive coordinator at Auburn back in 2020. Kind of hopped around a little bit since then, about 5 schools in the past 5 years, and then he took last year off watching his son Chandler, who was the quarterback over at Virginia. Now, this move was kind of made public over the weekend. Head coach Dabo Swinney bringing him in, but it was all made official earlier this morning at Clemson's Board of Trustees meeting. They ended up approving his contract as presented by Clemson Athletics Director Graham Neff. I'm going to let Graham explain that, and then we can break it down with all the nitty-gritty stuff in just a second.
Very pleased to move forward a request for consideration to hire Chad Morris as Clemson's next offensive coordinator position. Certainly this will be a return to Clemson for Coach Morris, of which we're excited about that strategy and path ahead in support of Coach Swinney. The terms for consideration, Mr. Chairman, are a 3-year contract at a flat salary of $1.2 million. Has standard bonus conditions, along with details within the buyout and guarantee section. All of those materials in full term sheet will be provided to the media present and per request, as we typically do, to provide more of those details as needed. Mr. Chairman, again, the committee has the materials, market information, and has reviewed significantly in order to consider the request to hire Chad Morris as Clemson's offensive coordinator.
Well, that request was unanimously approved. Again, that's a 3-year, $1.2 million annual contract for Chad Morris. And he, of course, has some incentives for postseason appearances, you know, bowl games, college football playoff appearances, all of those things. But really interesting part of his contract was that if Clemson's offense does not rank inside of the top 20 in the 2026 and the 2027 seasons, and he ends up getting fired, then Clemson will not owe him for that 3rd season. They will only owe him for the 2 seasons. As long as I'm reading that correctly, does that sound right to you, Kevin? Something interesting in there about that buyout clause and, you know, I guess keeping Morris honest in what he's doing.
I'll tell you, this is a bold move by Dabo Swinney. I think it's either the move that's going to keep him entrenched at Clemson for the next decade, or it's the one that's going to lead to his removal as the head coach of the Tigers going forward. I don't see any in-between space in this one, because this is him going back to what's familiar in Chad Morris. And it's, you know, one of the big red flags for Dabo the last few years has been that he's only hiring people he's close to for his assistant coaches, whether it's former players or even his own kids or people who, you know, also work in the school in other capacities. He's really tried to keep that inner circle pretty tight. And he kind of went outside of that, bringing Garrett Riley, and that didn't work out for a couple of years. So now he's going back to what's familiar and bringing in Chad Morris. It is a bold move. I don't know if this is the right. I'll say it. I don't think this is the right move. I don't know. I haven't seen anything in Chad Morris in the last decade that makes me think he's the right guy to be leading this offense again for the second time in the last 15 years for the Tigers. He was very good the first time he was here. That offense was revolutionary in a lot of ways. A lot of guys put up huge numbers for the Tigers and set themselves up for a long time going forward. But Rick, I don't think this is the right move for the Tigers, and I think it could end up costing Dabo Swinney his job.
I'm a little nervous about this move too, Kevin, because Chad Morris, he was with the Tigers when they started building the program. They formed that nucleus for those playoff runs and those 2 national championship runs. But you look at the players they had some top-notch receivers that went on to have very good NFL careers. And also, that's the time when Brent Venables took over as defensive coordinator. And you look at the guys they had on defense, especially defensive linemen, how many of those guys went on to the next level. And in this new era of college football with NIL, the transfer portal, Dabo hasn't been too productive in the portal. And that's one thing he has to do if he wants to keep up with everyone else. And you hear a lot of coaches say it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and Joes. So, yeah, I don't know if this is the right move either. Teagan?
Yeah, Rick, you brought the point up exactly that I was going to. Just the fact that Dabo, throughout his coaching career here at Clemson, has not been somebody that's necessarily adapted to the way that the sport is changing, specifically in the transfer portal, grabbing guys there, his opinions on NIL, the way he's talked about the conferences. He's always been a very old school style coach. So I was not exactly paying attention to Clemson back in 2011. I was about 7 or 8 years old. But the fact that, he's just going back to what's familiar, I don't know if that's necessarily the right move either. We can talk about all the success that Chad Morris had back then, but it was a different time in football. You weren't dealing with players going to 6 different programs throughout all of their eligibility. You just didn't see it. So, obviously we're seeing that today. But also, speaking of staff changes, Coastal Carolina with a complete overhaul of theirs with brand new head coach Ryan Beard now in charge, building up both of his offense and defensive staff. Of course, he's bringing over a lot of guys from Missouri State, his former school. So he's bringing over Nick Petrino to be the offensive coordinator, as well as LD Scott to be the defensive coordinator. Looking at each of their staffs individually, it's kind of interesting because the offense, Nick Petrino, brought in a lot of outside talent from Missouri State for his coaches underneath him. Whereas LD Scott, in charge of the defense, he brought in all of his Missouri State guys. So something interesting there. Of course, the transfer portal, a huge thing for Coastal right now. Lots of guys entered the portal from Coastal, including the season's starting QB, MJ Morris. He's in the portal. And then also something that was interesting, Zachary Courtney, the tight end, he was in the portal, decided to jump out of the portal, stay at Coastal. Staying at Coastal also is Robbie Washington, but then they've also got a handful of guys from Missouri State. By my count, there are at least 8 guys who have committed to Coastal Carolina from Missouri State to follow Ryan Beard. We got to take a quick break here on Palmetto Sports Daily, but we will be right back.
Welcome back to Palmetto Sports Daily. We move over to hockey, and we missed a lot of ECHL news over the time we were away. The players actually went on strike a little more than a week ago. They were on strike for a couple of days. All of last weekend's games were canceled. They did come to an agreement, had that ratified early last week, and they were back in action last Wednesday. But last night here at the North Charleston Coliseum, we had maybe the game everyone's going to be talking about for the next year as the Stingrays took on the Greensboro Gargoyles. And this one, just a wild game, as there was over 170 penalty minutes throughout this game. There was more than a dozen fights. The coach is saying there was an early on hit from the Gargoyles against one of the Stingrays that they didn't appreciate, and things got really chippy after that. Just fight after fight. And here you see some of it right now, but the really good part came in the middle of the second period when we got something we don't see too often, and that is a goalie fight. Nick, I want to take the video of this one, and this is Garen Bjorklund of the Stingrays just dropping the gloves, coming out from between the pipes, and the goalie's going at it, throwing some haymakers in this one before Bjorklund finally gets the takedown. and wins the very rare goalie fight for the Stingrays. They would go on to win this game 4-2, but everyone's going to be talking about the 170-plus penalty minutes they saw in this one throughout the afternoon. So a day to remember, a fight day over at the North Charleston Coliseum on Sunday.
Kevin, I don't know much about these two teams, but are they rivals? Have they had any epic fights before?
Well, this is actually Greensboro's first year of existence. The two teams had played on Friday up in Greensboro, and it was a little chippy then as well, but really nothing more than a regular hockey game. But like I said, head coach David Warsofsky said early on in this game yesterday, there was a hit against one of their players they didn't appreciate. Things got going back and forth, and you saw what happened. It was a fun day over at the Coliseum. We're going to be right back to wrap up this edition of Palmetto Sports Daily right after this.
Welcome back into Palmetto Sports Daily. Real quick before we go, we're going to go ahead and get some predictions for the Panthers playoff game out on the table. Again, they're hosting the Rams at 4:30 on Saturday. I'm going to say they're going to bring their defense. They're going to end up beating the Rams 24-21. Teagan, what are you thinking?
I'm going to have to go the opposite of you here. I'm going to go the Panthers lose 21-14. I think they're going to get a little bit lucky out there, but not too lucky. Kevin?
Rams 41-7. Rick?
Got to go with the Rams 27-10. It'll be a short run in the playoffs for the Panthers. That's going to wrap it up for PSD. Have a great evening.